Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Governor John Carney. Thank you for joining us today as I sign a proclamation in observance of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We're joined here this afternoon with our Attorney General, Kathleen Jennings, with the Chief Judge in Family Court, Mike Knoll, with advocates against domestic violence here in our state. We have some award recipients that we'll recognize in a few minutes. Normally, we sign this proclamation in my office, either in Wilmington or in Dover, and we have a number of advocates, victims of domestic violence, as well as folks from law enforcement who work hard every day to protect our neighbors against the scourge of domestic violence, those that are involved in outreach for those affected by domestic violence. And it's a way for all of us to recognize that really, really important work that's done every day in our state by incredibly dedicated public servants, and we tip our hats to them. Among them is our Attorney General and her team at the Attorney General's office. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Attorney General Kathleen Jennings. Thanks for joining us, Kathleen.
Thank you, Governor Carney, and thank you for shining a spotlight on this vitally important issue of domestic violence. And thank you so much to the advocates who have worked tirelessly to save lives and to help survivors find hope. Thank you, Chief Judge Knoll, for your continued efforts as the Chief Judge of Family Court and with respect to the work you're doing specifically in the domestic violence arena. Today, we are raising awareness of the scourge of domestic violence, a tragedy that is all too real and all too dangerous in our small state, and which has only become more of a threat under the pandemic. This issue is close to my heart. I have worked on it and worked together with many of you for decades, both in the courtroom, in legislative hall, and in the many meetings we have had to tackle this scourge. The Department of Justice works closely with survivors in domestic violence cases in the criminal and family divisions of our office. And every single one of those prosecutors and social workers who take on these challenges and who work with survivors will tell you how heartbreaking these cases are and how serious this issue is. It is sadly also one of the major drivers of gun violence in our state. That's in the stories of victims who are typically women who are shot or killed by abusive intimate partners. The statistics back that up. In 2018 alone, 13% of Delaware shootings with identified motives involved intimate partner violence. And I am grateful for the advocates and dedicated legislators who work each and every day to ensure that domestic violence is less likely to turn deadly for victims. Domestic violence victims often suffer in the shadows for a number of reasons: fear of retaliation, a sense of economic dependence on an abusive partner, and lack of awareness of resources being just a few of them. We are here today to bring the issue out of the shadows, to raise awareness not only for survivors who are seeking help, but for bystanders, neighbors, coworkers, even strangers who think someone might be in trouble and could make the call that saves a life. If you believe you or someone else is in immediate danger, call 911. If you are experiencing domestic violence or believe someone else may be, help is available through a 24-hour hotline, several hotlines in all 3 counties. Newcastle County, 302-762-6110, or 302-762-6110, also for non-English speakers. In Northern Kent County, 302-678-3886. I'll say that again, 302-678-3886, or 302-745-9874 for non-English speakers. In the rest of Kent County and in Sussex counties, 302-422-8058 or 302-745-9874 for non-English speakers. Thank you for listening to me today, and thank you everyone who is with me today for the valiant and courageous work that you do each and every day to help survivors of domestic violence. And with that, I will turn this over to our Chief Judge in Family Court, Chief Judge Michael Nunn.
Thank you, Attorney General Jennings. First of all, thank you, Governor Carney. You have been steadfast in hosting these events and also in your pledge to end domestic violence and to recognize the people who do the important work in our state. And Attorney General Jennings, again, can't thank you enough for your work, your leadership, and the work of your office in fighting and prosecuting domestic violence. It's interesting, I learned earlier this morning that today is National First Responders Day. So I think that is important to recognize our first responders. The past 20 months and the majority of this year have been challenging for us on many fronts. But throughout this time, the first responders, law enforcement, the advocates, the medical community, the crisis hotline people have continued to respond to domestic violence incidents and to assist victims. It has been a time of unprecedented collaboration, and that collaboration needs to continue as we move forward. We have a responsibility as a society to protect victims and children from domestic violence. Unfortunately, in the first 8 months of this year, Delaware has experienced 20 domestic violence-related fatalities. Based on my recollection, this is the highest amount of fatalities in a year in recent times. And of course, our year is not over yet. This is unacceptable, and we have to do much more work before we can say one day that domestic violence is no longer. We all know the devastating effects that domestic violence has on our children, our families, and our society. In October, as Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it is critical to the ongoing recognition, as the governor said and the attorney general said, of the work that we all do and the work that you all do in the critical need to have society combat, prevent, and ultimately end domestic violence. And not only do I wear or have the role of Chief Judge of Family Court, but I'm also the chair of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, which the Attorney General sits and all other members of the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch sit and meet regularly to create a better system for the response and eradication of domestic violence. And I want to thank you all for the work that you do. So with that, I would like to introduce Maureen Mo Monagle, the Executive Director of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, for the presentation of the Outstanding Service Awards. Mo?
Thank you, Your Honor. I am pleased to present the recipients of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council's Outstanding Service Award for 2021. This year, the award is being shared with Child Inc., People's Place 2, and the Delaware Family Court in recognition of the collaborative efforts and outstanding services these agencies continue to provide during the COVID-19 public health pandemic. Council annually recognizes individuals and programs that demonstrate an outstanding service in supporting those impacted by domestic violence. These agencies were nominated by Laura Graham, an attorney with the Community Legal Aid Society and vice chair of the DVCC. As stated in her nomination, all three nominees are deserving of the Outstanding Service Award, as all three entities and their staff acted as first responders for survivors in the first state throughout the pandemic, ensuring that survivors could access safety and the much needed care. When the pandemic began in March of 2020, all three agencies and their staff quickly acted to adapt policies and procedures to allow for critical emergency operations to continue, while ensuring the health and safety of staff and survivors. When the shelter-in-place requirements were implemented during COVID, it meant that survivors would be sheltering in place with their abuser, often for long periods of time. Family Court acknowledged that the relief offered by the protection from abuse process was more crucial than before. The court quickly worked with advocates and allied partners to create and implement a system for filing the PFA petitions electronically, as well as allowing all hearings to take place virtually. The court remained accessible to survivors, advocates, and allied partners throughout the pandemic. Leadership at the court, leadership at the court also kept an open mind and was willing to adapt or alter these policies to ensure that all litigants could access justice. These efforts undoubtedly led to many survivors obtaining the legal relief from the court to keep them safe. Child Inc. is the agency which provides emergency shelter and supportive services to survivors in Newcastle County, and People's Place II, the agency which provides similar services to survivors in Kent and Sussex counties, had to quickly adapt to ensure the emergency shelters remained open, adjusting to social distancing requirements to ensure survivors seeking refuge could continue to be housed safely. Staff at both agencies had to adjust and coordinate services to ensure survivors placed in hotels were safe and received the same supportive services that are offered to those in one of the shelters. These agencies had to be creative in trying to reach survivors in new ways when in-person contact was limited. They wanted to ensure that survivors knew that despite the pandemic, services were still available. Staff and volunteers of the Domestic Violence Advocacy Program, which is Child Inc.'s statewide program that provides legal advocacy to victims seeking PFA orders. They had to quickly adapt and work with family court to assist victims with filing PFA petitions electronically and appearing for hearings virtually. The DV treatment program staff at Child Inc. and the Turning Point program at People's Place also had to adapt to provide effective services virtually to individuals with a history of violence. The domestic violence treatment and intervention services, which can be court-ordered or voluntary, are critical services for offender accountability and survivor safety. I could go on, but in the interest of time, I'll try to wrap this up. We all know that coordinated and collaborative responses to domestic violence result in better outcomes for victims and perpetrators. While each agency serves a different role, they all demonstrated great communication, collaboration, flexibility, and commitment. All of these efforts were done to ensure that services were accessible to victims and survivors during the middle of a global pandemic. On behalf of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, I am honored to present this year's Outstanding Service Award recipients, Child Inc., People's Place II, and the Family Court. And with us today, we have Lori Sittler, the Executive Director of Child Inc., Mamie Charest, the Executive Director of People's Place, and obviously Chief Judge Knoll, representing Family Court.
Thank you, Mo. Why don't we have a few remarks from the award recipients? Congratulations. We appreciate your work under very difficult times, starting with the Chief Judge.
Thank you, Governor. And I would like to just make it known that even though I was chair of the DVCC, I did not vote for this award, although I do recognize the outstanding work that Child Inc. and People's Place had done. I mean, I'm accepting this award on behalf of our judges, our commissioners, and the incredible administration and staff of this court. I said earlier it was a time of unprecedented collaboration, and our staff adapted very, very quickly. We recognized early on we just couldn't close. We had to serve the citizens of Delaware in this critical area to be able to provide protection. And our staff and our administration, we did that with sometimes just 25% of staffing levels being in the building. So I want to thank them. I am so proud to lead this court and lead the extraordinary efforts of the people who come to work every day to fight and represent the citizens of Delaware. So thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Great work, dedicated personnel celebrating your anniversary of the court this year, again, in an unprecedented time. We certainly appreciate the work both of Child Inc. and People's Place II. Mamie, why don't you share some remarks, and congratulations again. Thank you for your really important work.
Thank you, Governor. People's Place is honored to receive the Outstanding Service Award. Our staff's dedication and commitment to serve others has never been more evident than it has been since the pandemic began. And we are grateful for the continued collaboration with our partners. Thanks again for having me today.
Thank you very much, and keep up the great work. Mamie from People's Place too, thank you for joining us as well. Or Lori, thank you for joining us as well. We appreciate your good work.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon to you and our esteemed guests. On behalf of Child Inc., I would like to thank my wonderful dedicated staff who ensured that our shelters for victims and their children remained open when safety was most needed. And when those shelters were full, we were also providing services to victims that we sheltered in local motels. To the therapists at Child Inc. who pivoted into the virtual world, brave new world for them, to ensure that counseling and group services continued for the victims, offenders, and children impacted by domestic violence. And to our domestic violence court advocates who assisted with filing the PFA petitions and accompanied victims to hearings on virtual platforms. As the judge explained, it was quite a partnership to ensure that the protection from abuse orders and that process continued. I'd also like to thank all of the other advocates and case managers here at Child Inc. in our domestic violence program who worked in the community to provide an array of support services to ensure that people were safe and healthy during the height of the pandemic. My staff are my heroes, and I think it's appropriate that today is First Responders Day because no one was more on the front lines than those who were serving domestic violence victims. I'd like to thank the DV Coordinating Council for this recognition and to Vice Chair Laura Graham for nominating Child Inc., People's Place, and the courts for the Outstanding Service Award. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori and Mamie. Thank you for congratulating and recognizing your employees, your advocates, your counselors that work hard every day on behalf of those who are victims of domestic violence and survivors. And Judge Newell, thank you again and congratulations to Family Court, to all the judges and the commissioners there for the really difficult and challenging work under the most difficult of circumstances. Sue Ryan, thanks for joining us again from the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and please join in and offer some remarks.
Thank you so much, Governor Carney. And thank you, Governor, for your commitment to end and prevent domestic violence. We are so grateful for your leadership and your genuine concern and caring spirit. And congratulations to Chief Judge Newell, Family Court, Child Inc., and People's Place. Well-deserved award. Your response and your perseverance during the pandemic has been critically important for DV survivors. And acknowledgement of Family Court and Child Inc. and People's Place is also a reminder that domestic violence is a community concern requiring a community's response. The Delaware Coalition Against Domestic Violence is so grateful for all of the DV service providers, Family Court, first responders, healthcare workers, and domestic violence advocates for your dedication and your relentless commitment. COVID-19, a pandemic, has continued into a second year. It is a public health crisis that has highlighted the intersection between health and safety. Domestic violence is also a public health crisis. Intimate partner violence and adolescent dating abuse are both as prevalent as heart disease. Sexual violence is more prevalent than diabetes. Stalking is more prevalent than breast cancer. And just as we allocate resources to address health, we need resources to foster safety. Gender-based violence arises from a deep-seated sense of entitlement born from inequities and sexism and harmful gender norms, and media violence that bombards us every day, and social norms that support aggression. And all of this violence arises from a need to have power and control over another. But Delaware is committed to ending this violence through intervention and prevention services. We are so grateful for the courage and commitment of first responders and DV advocates. And again, Governor Carney, we are so grateful for your leadership. And finally, to those who are victims of domestic violence, please know that you are not alone and we are here to help. Thank you, and it's my honor to turn it back to the governor.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you for the work of the coalition. You mentioned so many people who normally would join us when we're in person. They'd be gathered around the room and we would all clap and express our appreciation. It is a day where we honor first responders and the first responder community. Our law enforcement agencies up and down the state would be gathered with us as well. And we offer them our deepest appreciation. Let me cap off our session here with the reading of the Proclamation in observance of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Whereas domestic violence impacts Delawareans without regard to age, race, religion, or economic status. When victims suffer at the hands of a spouse or partner, it affects children, families, and the entire communities, as Sue has mentioned. And whereas 22,745 domestic violence incidents were reported to Delaware law enforcement agencies during the last fiscal year, which is just an incredible number, again, during this very difficult time. And whereas 11,281 of the domestic violence incidents reported were criminal incidents, of which 37% had children present and 15% resulted in physical injury. And we appreciate the Attorney General and our family court and other courts for their work there. And whereas 3,048 calls were received by domestic violence hotlines throughout the state, connecting victims to supportive services such as shelters, counseling, transitional housing, and medical and legal services to help victims escape the cycle of abuse. And whereas anyone can become a victim of domestic violence, as 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And whereas we recognize the really important work of domestic violence advocates, crisis hotline staff, victim service organizations, prosecutors, and law enforcement officers, the first responders we recognize today, in helping victims of domestic violence. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month is an opportunity to recognize the strength and courage of those currently surviving abuse, as well as to honor those who were harmed or do not survive at the hands of their current or former partners. Now, therefore, we, John Carney, Governor, and Bethany Hall, Long Lieutenant Governor, do hereby declare October 2021 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the state of Delaware, and urge all Delawareans to become involved in efforts to prevent and respond to domestic violence and to recognize the impact of domestic violence in our communities. It's been signed by the Lieutenant Governor, and now I've signed it as well. Thank you again. Congratulations to the award recipients today. Thank you to our Attorney General, Chief Judge Newell, Demo, and Sue, and to all those who work every day to fight this scourge in our communities.